In the summer of 1996, a 27-year-old hiker named Daniel set out on what was supposed to be a short trek through the dense forests of British Columbia. He was experienced, confident, and familiar with the trails. Friends and family expected him back by evening, but Daniel never returned. At first, no one thought much of it. It wasn't unusual for him to extend a hike by a few hours, even by a day. But when 2 days passed with no sign of him, concern turned into fear. Search and rescue teams were dispatched immediately. Helicopters scanned the mountain ranges, dogs were brought to trace his scent, and volunteers combed the dense undergrowth. Despite their efforts, not a single clue was found. No backpack, no boot prints, no trace of Daniel at all. The mystery only deepened as weeks turned into months. Local newspapers covered the story extensively, highlighting how a skilled hiker could vanish without leaving the faintest trail. Some speculated he had fallen victim to the rugged terrain. Others whispered about foul play, or even that Daniel had deliberately disappeared to escape his life. By the end of 1996, hope had started to fade. The case went cold, leaving only unanswered questions and a grieving family desperate for closure. For a decade, Daniel's disappearance remained one of British Columbia's most puzzling unsolved mysteries. But then, in 2006, a single discovery reignited the case. Hidden deep in the wilderness, a message was found, a message that would leave everyone silent. As the days stretched into weeks after Daniel's disappearance, the search effort in British Columbia grew into one of the largest the region had ever seen. Local authorities worked side by side with volunteers, neighbors, and even hikers who had never met Daniel but felt compelled to help. Posters with his photo were stapled to trees, taped to shop windows, and pinned to community boards across nearby towns. Helicopters swept the skies, equipped with infrared cameras to detect body heat in the thick forest. On the ground, trained dogs moved through ravines and undergrowth, their handlers calling out Daniel's name. Experienced mountaineers retraced the routes he was most likely to have taken, marking every clearing, cave, and ridge. Yet there was no trace, not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, nothing that hinted at where he had gone. The lack of evidence created tension within the investigation. Some believed Daniel had slipped and fallen into one of the countless hidden gorges, places nearly impossible to reach. Others feared the possibility of an animal attack, though no signs pointed to it. A more unsettling theory soon began to circulate. Perhaps Daniel had never intended to come back at all. His family refused to believe that. They knew Daniel as someone who loved adventure, but always returned home. Still, with each passing day, their hope dimmed. By the end of the summer, the official search was scaled back. The wilderness had swallowed him whole, and the trail had gone cold. But whispers remained. Locals spoke of strange sightings, hikers who claimed to hear distant calls at night, and shadows moving just out of reach. The case was far from forgotten. It lingered, haunting the community, waiting for an answer that wouldn't come until 10 years later. With the official search scaled back, the disappearance of Daniel turned into a mystery that locals could not stop talking about. Around campfires, in coffee shops, and across the small towns of British Columbia, theories multiplied. Some were logical, rooted in the unforgiving dangers of the wilderness. Others drifted into something darker, more unsettling. One of the first theories was the simplest. Daniel had slipped into one of the many hidden ravines or caves scattered through the mountains. These places could easily conceal a body for decades, untouched and unseen. Search teams had scoured dozens of them but admitted that many remained inaccessible. Another idea pointed to a possible animal encounter. Bears and cougars were common in the region, and though no signs of an attack were found, the thought lingered in people's minds. But there were whispers of other possibilities. Some suggested Daniel had staged his own disappearance, leaving behind his old life to start fresh somewhere far away. To support this, a few claimed he had been unusually quiet in the weeks before his trip, perhaps hiding a secret struggle. Others believed foul play might have been involved had he run into someone dangerous in the woods. His family rejected these rumors. To them, Daniel was no runaway, no victim of secret dealings. He was a son, a brother, a friend who loved the mountains but loved his home even more. Their heartbreak grew with each passing year, fueled by the cruel uncertainty of not knowing what had happened. The mystery clung to the community like fog rolling through the valleys. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had an answer. And for 10 years, that silence endured, until the day a message surfaced, one that would change everything. By 1997, less than a year after Daniel's disappearance, the case had already gone cold in the official sense. Search teams were pulled back, funding dried up, and the local authorities moved on to other priorities. But for the people who lived in the surrounding towns, the mystery never really faded. Every hike into the mountains carried a strange weight, a reminder that somewhere out there, a young man had simply vanished. Daniel's family held on desperately. Each year on the anniversary of his disappearance, they gathered near the trailhead where he was last seen. They lit candles, said prayers, and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. Newspapers occasionally ran anniversary articles, keeping his face alive in the public eye. But as the years stretched on, hope turned into exhaustion, and exhaustion hardened into grief. The silence was unbearable. For 10 long years, no evidence surfaced. Not a piece of clothing, not a bone, not even the faintest clue. It was as if Daniel had walked into the forest and dissolved into thin air. His absence became a ghost that haunted his family's every moment. Still, some could not let go. Amateur sleuths began to pore over old maps, convinced they could solve what official teams could not. Rumors continued to circulate. A hiker claimed to have seen a figure that looked like Daniel months later. Another swore they found a boot print in a remote clearing. None of it led anywhere. Then, in 2006, the unthinkable happened. A group of explorers stumbled upon something hidden, something that had been out there all along. It wasn't a backpack or a jacket. It was a message. And the words written inside were enough to leave an entire community in silence. It was the summer of 2006, when a group of amateur explorers decided to trek through one of the most remote sections of the British Columbia wilderness. Their goal wasn't to solve mysteries, it was simply adventure. But deep in the thick undergrowth, far from the marked trails, they stumbled upon something that froze them in their tracks. Wedged between two moss-covered rocks was a small, weathered container. It looked out of place, almost deliberately hidden. When they pried it open, inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and protected in a plastic sleeve. The handwriting was shaky but still legible. At the top was a name, Daniel. The note was short, only a few sentences, but its contents would shake everyone who read it. It spoke of being lost, of running out of supplies, and of a presence in the woods that wasn't supposed to be there. The final line was chilling. "If someone finds this, know that I tried to get out, but it followed me." The explorers were stunned. They immediately reported the find to the authorities, and within days, investigators confirmed that the handwriting matched samples from Daniel's journals. The message was real. News of the discovery spread quickly. Local headlines screamed of the message from the missing hiker, and the story once again dominated conversations. For Daniel's family, the note was both a breakthrough and a nightmare. After 10 years of silence, there were finally words from him, but those words carried more questions than answers. What had he seen? What had followed him? And why had the wilderness kept this secret hidden for so long? The release of Daniel's message sent shockwaves through British Columbia. For a decade, the mystery had been a silent wound in the community. But now the discovery reignited old fears and fueled new ones. People gathered in cafes, at work, and even on hiking trails, whispering about what the note could mean. Local newspapers published the chilling words in bold print, and television stations ran continuous coverage. Headlines screamed, message from the missing hiker found after 10 years, and what did Daniel mean by "it followed me"? For many, the note seemed to confirm what had always been whispered, that something unnatural, something unexplainable might have happened in those woods. The authorities, however, tried to maintain a calm, logical stance. They suggested Daniel may have been hallucinating due to dehydration, starvation, or exhaustion. His words, they argued, could reflect the mental toll of being lost for days in the unforgiving wilderness. But for the locals, that explanation felt hollow. Too many had their own strange stories of the forest, eerie sounds at night, shadows moving where no one should be, feelings of being watched when alone. Daniel's family was devastated, yet clung to the note as proof that he had fought to survive. His sister gave an emotional interview saying, "At least now we know he was alive long enough to write those words. He didn't just disappear without a trace, but the thought of him being followed by what, by who, it haunts us." Speculation exploded online, where forums lit up with theories ranging from a stalker to something supernatural. The note had answered one question. Daniel had tried to survive, but it opened a dozen more. And the most unsettling question of all remained. What had been out there with him in 1996? In the weeks following the discovery of Daniel's note, investigators organized a renewed search of the British Columbia wilderness. For the first time in nearly a decade, helicopters circled above the forest canopy, and ground teams pressed back into the unforgiving terrain where Daniel had vanished. The haunting words, "it followed me," gave them a new direction. They weren't just searching for remains anymore, they were searching for an explanation. This time the teams were more methodical. They mapped every crevice, ravine, and cave within miles of where the note had been found. Drones buzzed through the treetops, and cadaver dogs were brought in once again. Searchers discovered fragments of old camping gear, though much of it was rusted and unrecognizable. Each item was carefully catalogued, but none could be definitively linked to Daniel. Local guides who knew the forest well joined the search. They spoke of places few dared to go, steep cliffs where even experienced hikers lost their footing, and valleys where sunlight barely touched the ground. In one of these shadowed ravines, searchers found a torn scrap of fabric, partially buried beneath leaves. The color matched the jacket Daniel had been last seen wearing, but it was too degraded for confirmation. The deeper they searched, the stranger the atmosphere became. Some officers reported feeling watched, as though the forest itself resisted their presence. Others dismissed these feelings as paranoia fueled by the note's ominous words. Still, the tension was undeniable. Despite weeks of effort, no body was found, no conclusive evidence surfaced. Yet the forest seemed to whisper with secrets, and every discovery, however small, hinted that Daniel's final days were far more complicated than anyone had imagined. As word spread that the renewed search had failed to uncover Daniel's body, the public's imagination filled the void. The discovery of the note had breathed new life into the case, but without answers, speculation turned darker, stranger, and far more unsettling. One theory that gained traction was that Daniel had encountered someone in the woods, perhaps a drifter, a fugitive, or even another hiker who wished him harm. Supporters of this idea pointed to the words, "it followed me," as evidence that he wasn't alone. Some believed he may have been stalked, hunted even, and that whoever was responsible had hidden his remains so thoroughly that they would never be found. Others leaned towards something less human. The dense forests of British Columbia have long been fertile ground for legends. Creatures whispered about in indigenous folklore. Shadowy figures said to move silently between the trees. On online forums, countless users debated whether Daniel had seen something that defied explanation, something that terrified him enough to record it in a final note. Skeptics countered with simpler ideas. Maybe the "it" Daniel mentioned was hunger, exhaustion, or fear itself. Alone in the wilderness, surrounded by darkness and silence, a mind could easily begin to fracture. Hallucinations weren't uncommon in survival scenarios. Could his message have been the rambling of a man near death, desperately trying to make sense of his own fading reality? For Daniel's family, these theories were painful to hear, but impossible to silence. Every interview, every article brought new speculation, keeping the wound fresh. The lack of closure left a vacuum that only grew with time, and into that void poured endless possibilities, none of which brought comfort. The case no longer felt like a simple disappearance. It was becoming something much bigger. A story about fear, the unknown, and a message that refused to be forgotten. Nearly 2 years after the note was found, the mystery took another turn. A small group of hikers drawn to the area by the case's notoriety ventured deep into the same wilderness where Daniel had vanished. They weren't investigators, just curious adventurers who wanted to see the landscape that had swallowed a man whole. But what they stumbled upon reignited the case yet again. Hidden beneath a thick carpet of moss and fallen branches, they uncovered what appeared to be an old makeshift shelter. It was crudely built, with rotting logs stacked to form a partial wall and strips of weather-worn tarp clinging weakly to the frame. Inside, they found remnants of a fire pit, long extinguished, and a few metal food tins so rusted they crumbled at a touch. But the most unsettling discovery was a piece of cloth, faded but still showing the pattern of Daniel's favorite flannel shirt, the one he had been last seen wearing in 1996. Near it, buried beneath damp earth, was a cracked watch. The family later confirmed it looked identical to the one Daniel had owned. The find was both promising and chilling. Did Daniel manage to survive for days, maybe even weeks after he vanished? If so, why hadn't he made it back to civilization? And more disturbingly, why had he written that he was being followed? Investigators returned to the site, combing every inch for DNA or clues. But just like before, the wilderness offered more questions than answers. No body, no clear evidence of what had happened. Only fragments of a story that ended in silence. The discovery suggested Daniel's final days were not immediate, but drawn out, marked by struggle and fear. And that realization made the message he left behind even more haunting. 10 years after Daniel's disappearance, and even with the discoveries that followed, the truth of what happened in the British Columbia wilderness remains unsolved. The note, the tattered shirt, the broken watch, and the makeshift shelter together tell a story, but one that ends before it can reveal the final chapter. For investigators, the case stands as one of the most frustrating in the region's history. Despite renewed searches, technology, and public attention, no remains were ever recovered. Officially, Daniel is presumed dead, lost to the unforgiving wilderness. But unofficially, his case is remembered for the chilling message that continues to echo. It followed me. For his family, the note is both a comfort and a torment. Comfort, because it proves Daniel was alive long enough to leave a trace. Torment, because the words suggest he died in fear, stalked by something or someone that no one has ever identified. His sister once said, "We wanted answers, but maybe all we'll ever have is his voice on that paper, and it still keeps us awake at night." In the community, Daniel's story has become legend. Hikers still whisper about him when they pass through the forests of British Columbia. Some leave small memorials along the trails, stones stacked, ribbons tied to trees, as if to honor a man whose final steps were taken there, and to warn others that the woods, as beautiful as they are, can also be merciless. The mystery endures because it touches something deeper than just one missing person. It forces us to ask unsettling questions. What dangers hide in the wilderness? What fears consume us when we're truly alone? And perhaps most haunting of all, what did Daniel see in those last moments when he wrote the words that would define his story forever?